Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the Historic Trust's very first virtual workshop via Zoom. And this is a Zoom webinar. I'm Dorothy Guzzo, the Executive Director of the New Jersey Historic Trust. And if you are seeing me in the middle of your presentation, you can change that by going to the top of your screen to view options and clicking on side by side. And that should put me to the right side of your slide. The presentation itself is being recorded, so if you need to go over anything again in the future, it'll be available next week and you'll receive a follow-up email as to how to link into it. Also, because this is a webinar, and I'm guessing most of you are pretty familiar with Zoom by this point in time, but this is a webinar, I can't see any of you. But I understand that there's over 60 people viewing this webinar, so thank you all for taking time out of your afternoon and attending this. And I think that you will only be able to see the presenter and the PowerPoint presentation. Can you flip to the next slide, Erin? Okay, so I think most of you know what our mission is, but by this time, but I did just want to provide you with a reminder that our funding for this grant does come from the corporate business tax dedication that is reallocated to the open space farmland and for historic preservation. Our Board of Trustees makes its final recommendations to the Garden State Preservation Trust, and from there, the legislature has to pass an appropriations bill for the governor to sign. Next slide, please, Erin. So first, let me formally congratulate each of you on receiving your planning or heritage tourism grant. And I'm happy to report that our appropriations bill, where all your money is, has passed both the Senate and the Assembly. We anticipate having the governor's signature in the very near future. And once we have this bill signed, we'll be able to execute your grant agreement. The governor's signature does start the clock ticking. And towards the end of this presentation, we're going to hear from Ashley about ways to get the word out and about generating social media buzz. And keep in mind that we have a big presentation check, that if you want to do a check presentation event, socially distanced, of course, we're available, as is our board. Next slide. Today, you'll be hearing from Erin, Glenn, Carrie, and Haley, and Sam is in the background monitoring the questions section. You can let him also know if you're having any technical issues. Erin will also explain how we're going to field your questions after each section. So I'm happy you're able to join us this afternoon, and please know that we look forward to working with you and seeing your projects come to fruition. And now I'm going to turn it over to Erin Fredrickson for us to get started.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. As Dorothy said, my name is Erin Fredrickson. I'm a historic preservation specialist with the Trust and a program officer, so you might recognize me from some of the site visits I conducted last summer, which feels like a lifetime ago. But we're happy to have you here today. I am going to very quickly go over basically what we're discussing today, the grant agreement process, like a Cliff Notes version, very quick. And then pass it off to my colleagues to get into the nitty-gritty. So to give you an idea of what we're discussing, again, I'll go over the grant agreement process very quickly, lay the groundwork for how that goes. From there, I'll talk a little bit about the materials that your primary contact of your organization should have received via email about 2 weeks ago. And from there, I'll pass it off to my colleague Carrie to talk about executing your grant agreement. We'll talk about defining your scope of work, administering an active grant. That's when we start talking about reimbursements. So I encourage you to keep your ears peeled. Is that the saying? I don't think so. Anyway, from there, we'll go to closing out the grant. Ashley will talk about publicity for your project, and then we'll open up the Q&A. So like Dorothy said, I think we're all mostly aware of how Zoom works by now that we've been doing this for close to a year. But Zoom webinar is a little different. So if you take a look at your screen, there should be a little toolbar with a box that says Q&A. If you hop in there, any questions you have, you can ask. I am asking, or we are asking as a staff, because there is a lot of information covered in this webinar, we are requesting that questions be limited to sort of general questions that might apply to a lot of people. If you think your question is something that other people might also have, we encourage you to ask it. If your question is a little more project specific, Sam is going to let you know to reach out to your program officer, because oftentimes these are projects or questions that your program officer can best answer. So at the end of each section, we are going to check the Q&A. Sam is going to let us know if there are any questions that we should answer now rather than later. But I do just want to encourage everyone to stay behind a little bit longer, stay after class, and let us see if we have anything else to answer at the end. So here's that Cliff Notes grant agreement process that I was talking about. So you might notice that you have already completed step 1, just about. It's to attend the grantee workshop. So congratulations, you made it. From there, or from today, you need to supply everything in the info packet. That's one of those documents that you received via email about 2 weeks ago. Once you send that to us, we create 2 grant agreements. That takes a little bit of time, especially digitally, virtually, and we get those ready to send out to you. So we send 2 copies of that grant agreement to you for your signature. Once you've signed, you mail them back to us. Once we have them again, we ask Dorothy to sign them. And then once Dorothy signs, she sends them upstairs for our fiscal department to sign. As soon as our fiscal department signs those grant agreements, we are under contract. We have executed grant agreements. That means that all reporting, signage, and easement requirements are in effect. That also means once your grant is executed, that you can apply for reimbursement. So just to reiterate, you cannot apply for reimbursement until we have a grant agreement in place. All right, so those materials that you received about 2 weeks ago are the grantee info packet. Sometimes we call them the grantee packet or the info packet, and the grant manual. The grantee info packet contains all the information that we need in order to compile your grant agreement. Something that I should make very clear, because there was some confusion about this last year. Your info packet is not your grant agreement. It just contains the information we need to get the paperwork rolling. So you'll notice if you flip through, there's a variety of information we need. Things like NJ Star vendor numbers, EINs. Carrie will discuss this a little bit more, and we encourage you to flip through that document as soon as possible. You also need to attach a couple documents, and we need original signatures at this time. So I would encourage you to take a look at this as soon as possible, print it out, fill it out, append any attachments as necessary, and mail it to your program officer as soon as possible. We need them by March 15th. The reason for that being that we want to get your grant agreements going so that we can reimburse you. So just keep that date in mind. The other document that you received via email is your grant manual. This is everything you need to know to manage your grant. Trust staff work very hard to make sure that this is a comprehensive how-to. So we encourage you to take a look at this document just to get an idea of what if you can find the answer there first. It contains sample reimbursement forms, the specifications for signage, which actually doesn't really apply to you in this case because you're a planning grant, but it is a very helpful document, so we encourage you to flip through. So if you lose your grant manual, don't worry, it is available on our resources webpage. If you go to njht.org, you can hop into our grantee resources webpage, which contains everything that you would find in your grant agreement, such as reimbursement forms, your grant manual, things like that. It's a very useful page on our website. I should note that we are anticipating a website redesign in February sometime, I think is when everything is scheduled for. So if you hop on our website and everything looks totally different, don't worry, the information is all still there. You might just have to dig around a little bit. Of course, if you can't find anything there or you get stuck, you are always welcome to contact your program officer. I really can't state that enough. That's what we're here for, and we're happy to help. So from there, I think I saw a question in the Q&A. Sam, if that's something we should answer now, I would be happy to do what I can.
Yeah, this is a great question. Laura Burnham asks, the resolution we submitted with the application was to apply and accept the grant. If we submit a certified copy, is that resolution acceptable?
That's a good question. Glenn?
If the resolution specifically said not only to submit the application, but to also accept or to sign the grant agreement, then yes, it could. Most are two separate resolutions, but if it says both, then yes, it is acceptable. You should send it to your program officer just to make sure, just in case if you do need a new resolution, but it should be okay.
Great. So with that, I will pass this off to my colleague, Carrie, to talk about executing the grant agreement.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Hogan. I'm a Senior Historic Preservation Specialist with the Trust, and I'm also the Fiscal Officer. I wanted to start off by directing you to the first chapter of your packet. If you have it printed or have it in front of you, that's where we're going to begin with executing the grant agreement. And this part discusses exactly how to do that. It's really a step-by-step guide to how to get your the information that's needed to your PO at the Trust so that your grant contract can be began and also be approved. So with that, we're going to start out with the checklist. The first form that you should see is the checklist, and there's a picture of it on the screen as well. And this outlines all of the required forms that we've been talking about. So it has the checklist itself and the items on the checklist need to be completed and returned to your PO as part of your initial grant agreement package. And again, this is so that your program officer can prepare the grant agreement document. These documents altogether that I'm going to be covering, again, they're not your actual grant agreement. They're just the essential information that we use as your program officers to write and draft the contract that will become your grant agreement. The faster you can get these forms filled out and accurately handed off to your, PO, the faster then your grant agreement will be generated for you. You'll receive it in the mail and sign the copies. Also included after the checklist, again, which itemizes what you're going to need to send us, is the acceptance, a letter of acceptance for the project. And this needs to be signed and returned with an original signature on it, along with all the items on the checklist. Next slide, please. Okay, so next on the list here, we have the information form. This is also, for some reason, a document that a lot of people think is the grant agreement, but it is just, again, the basic information that we need in order to begin drafting your grant agreement. And this is an especially critical document, and to make sure that this information form is accurate and up to date. So in order to kind of get things going for yourself, what you're going to need to do is register with NJ Start, and that's the state's mandatory procurement and payment system. You get a vendor number from that. Many of you are probably already in the vendor system, but you're going to want to make sure that you enter your organization's EIN number and your tax ID number and the current address into your NJ Start profile. Even though some of you may have received grants from us or from another state entity in the past, which would mean that you are already in the state system, that information isn't always accurate. It'll have the name or a slightly different address or a PO box in it. So you're going to want to go into NJ Start, which you can see the address there below, and make sure that your information is correct and up to date. Incorrect information entered into NJ Start will delay payments of your award. And so we don't want to do that. So if you're especially a nonprofit organization, you're going to, and a first-time grantee, you're going to want to do that soon to make sure that you have a vendor number, since we can't pay you until you have one. Most state, county, and municipal entities are already in the state's vendor system one way or another. They've been paid by the state in some way, and that's underneath your EIN number for your borough, your city, your township. However, again, it's best to contact NJ Start directly to confirm that your preferred address and contact information are up to date. Also in NJ Start, you'll have the option to sign up for ACH payments, that's automated clearinghouse payments. These are electronic payments that deposit grant reimbursement funds directly into your chosen bank account instead of waiting on a check from Treasury to go through snail mail. And I highly, highly recommend, especially if you are beginning your first NJ Start profile, that you sign up for ACH if it's possible for you. This will expedite your reimbursement exponentially, sometimes up to weeks. There's been a lot of slowdown with the Postal Service in recent months, and the paper check, although it doesn't take very long, usually 2 to 3 weeks for Treasury to process it, that with slowdown at the post office has made some payments come in between 4 and 6 weeks. So something to think about. It's definitely a really good option if you have that ability with your bank. Next slide, please. Okay, next on the checklist is proof of insurance. All grantees must maintain insurance for the entire term of their grant agreement and the full term of their easement, if you have one. The New Jersey Historic Trust must be named as an additional insured on the insurance certificate. So in that lower left-hand box, it should say New Jersey Historic Trust with our name on it as additionally insured. Please be sure that you include the project number for your project. That will be 2020.XXXX. It must be included on the certificate of insurance so that that particular form, once you get it and it's passed on to us, is correctly filed with its corresponding project. Please request that from the insurance company to add the project number as well as the trust to be additionally insured on your certificate of insurance. Grantee must submit certificate of insurance or documentation before the grant agreement document can be created. So we cannot continue drafting or finalizing your grant agreement if this is pending. So it's something that you could easily get ahead of by maybe contacting your insurance company now and just make sure that you have it. It's something, this is one of the documents that if you jump on it right now, it shouldn't take very long and you'll have it in hand so that when your other documents are finished, you won't have to be waiting on the insurance company to send it to you. So hopefully that won't be an issue for any of you. Next slide, please. Okay, next is the all-important Attachment E, Governing Body Board Resolution. Your governing body, city, county board, needs to pass a resolution that identifies by name the individual authorized to sign the grant agreement. In other words, the individual in Attachment E must be the same individual identified in the resolution, must be the same person who signs the grant agreement. So to the question earlier, this is exactly the point. If you have a resolution that only says, yes, my borough can apply for this grant or can receive the grant, but it does not name by name a signatory for the grant agreement, then you will need a new resolution. So bear that in mind and have a look, especially municipalities. Municipalities often have to get to resolutions. So again, we cannot complete your grant agreement until we have an authorized signatory by resolution from you. The resolution must have an original signature, all original signatures in ink, blue or black, and be imprinted with a raised government, corporate, or notary seal or stamp. Please be advised that most people just go straight to the notary so that there's no confusion as to whether or not it has been properly certified. If your board secretary does not have an official stamp, you're going to have to take it to a notary for certification. In fact, most non-governmental organizations just go straight to the notary just in case. If resolutions are not properly certified, they won't be accepted. And again, this will delay completion of your grant agreement. And we don't want to do that. We want to avoid that with any chance we can. And if you have questions as these documents come up, make sure to reach out to your PO, because even though the information is in your manual and here in these presentation notes, it'll just be more helpful and more expedient if you do have questions to reach out and we can go over it again with you. Next slide, please. This is attachment G for accounting. your CFO or organization's treasurer must review the requirements of the grant agreement, including state required audits and reporting, and sign this form with an original signature. It's important to note that your CFO treasurer cannot be the same person who's authorized by resolution to execute the grant agreement. This provides double oversight. So that way you have one signature for the grant agreement and the CFO is separate for the financial certification. Your CFO will also be the same person who certifies reimbursement requests as you need them. And that person also signs all payment vouchers, which you'll find examples of. They're in your grant packet, I believe. Next, what happens after the CFO certifies the reimbursement request and payment vouchers, and we have all the information and documents that we need that we've just discussed that are on the checklist, 2 copies of the grant agreement will be sent to you for signature and return. Upon return of both copies, Dorothy, the executive director, then signs them. The trust then forwards those 2 signed agreements to the Department of Community Affairs Grant Administration Division to establish an account with the state. Once those grant agreements are fully executed, meaning signed by a DCA fiscal official, then both agreements are mailed to, then one agreement is mailed back to the grantee and one remains at the trust office. The grant agreement that you receive back in the mail, fully executed, that means that you have an account open with the state for this project and the funds have been allocated to your project. You're going to want to make sure that you hang on to your grant agreement and not misplace it. It's an important document. It's a living document that will also help you with reporting and reimbursements down the road. The information that you will need later on is inside the grant agreement, also in the manual, but the grant agreement as well. And they should be kept together and kept safely. We have one on site, of course, as well, if you get into a bind, but we typically don't scan them and have them ready to email. It's really on you to make sure that you're keeping track of it. Let's see. Oh, if there's ever a change in between, I don't know why there would be, but it's happened before where there's like a change in the project manager between the time of that window of time between the grant agreement is being processed and the actual execution. Just let your PO know so that we can discuss things with the DCA fiscal and see if we can get the proper project manager listed and named so that that person and all of that information is up to date in the grant agreement. So that's it for me. Are there any questions in the chat that need to be addressed?
There are a number of questions, and they're really good ones.
Great.
The first 2 are about board resolutions, and they were asked before you address that, but I do think the answers bear repeating. I'll read both of them together. Heather asks, may the board resolution be conducted by email? And Angelica asks, for the board resolution form, what if your nonprofit does not have a raised seal for this resolution? What is acceptable?
Okay, if your nonprofit does not have a raised seal, you need to go to a notary and have it notarized, and that notary will have their official seal on it. So I went over it kind of quickly, but that's what you'll need to do. And to the other question, the long-term answer for whether or not we can accept digital signatures for, was it the grant agreement? Is that the grant agreement itself or the resolution?
The resolution.
Sorry. The resolution, okay. We have been during COVID accepting colored scanned copies of your resolution with original signatures. Often the embossed or raised seal doesn't come through, however, and so it's difficult for DCA to certify it the way that they would normally certify it. So if your only option is to send it via email, you're still going to have to get original signatures. But if your only option is to send it via email, then you can, and we can start, use it in order to continue forward with drafting the grant agreement. However, we will need the actual resolutions with original signatures in the long term. We'll need a physical copy of them for our files. So under COVID, what we've been doing is we've been a little lenient on this point, and it's been so far okay, but it's not ideal and it's not preferred. So talk with your PO. But my suggestion is to get your original signatures. If you need to send it via email, that's fine, but just know that we need a hard copy eventually.
Great. Another question about the resolution is, can our board president of our association be named on the resolution and voted on at our open board meeting, or does it have to be a borough resolution?
Okay, so is the applicant the nonprofit or the borough?
I'm not sure, but I think you can address both.
Okay, so if it's a nonprofit, that's the applicant who's named on the grant agreement and who will be receiving the funds. You can use your board secretary and get it notarized. If it's a borough, that then you'll need to have your representative, mayor, clerk, whatever, sign it instead.
Great. The question about insurance. Do I need insurance if I am applying for a heritage tourism project?
That's a good question. Yes, you do. We have to be additionally insured on all projects.
Great. This question from Patricia is a little vague. It says, has this person been assigned? I don't have the name. So I don't know if that question is about the signatory in the board resolution or if it's about the program officer. So maybe we can address both of those.
So your program officer would be named in your letter of your award letter. That, if you have that, that would direct you to who you should be in contact with and who you'll be working with for the term of your project. In general, it's the same person who came to your site for a site visit. I'm sorry, what was the second part of that question?
Oh, I'm not sure which person she was talking about. I thought maybe she might be referring to the assigned signatory from the board resolution. Glenn, maybe you want to answer that one?
So the organization itself will determine who's going to be the signatory. Most people have their resolution signatory, the person who's going to sign the grant agreement, be the same person who's the project manager. It's good practice, I think, to have the person who's close to the project be the one that's signing the agreement, because they will be the person that will be most familiar down the road with such things as reporting. They'll be able to report on the grant agreement as needed if the reports are necessary. So typically, the person signed is either a project manager or, in many cases, a board of directors, someone on the board, or someone from the borough.
Great. Sorry, I'm getting feedback that I'm very quiet. I hope this is better. Can the staff confirm that?
I could hear you, Sam.
You can hear me, but it's still quiet?
It's still...
It's a little quiet.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll try to speak up. The next question is, can I have a copy of one of the slides for reference? We are going to put a PDF of this slideshow up on our website under the resources tab. We're also looking into how to provide a recording of the entire presentation. The next question is another insurance question. Does the insurance company need to list the trust as a loan? Carrie, I don't know how you want to address that. Well, I'll let you speak.
No, I've never seen that. We just have to be additionally insured under your policy.
I've seen it once listed as a loan, just one time out of all of our grants. So that might be an option, but no, you're right, Carrie. It's just additionally insured.
Great. Okay, we have some questions that I think are a little more specific to individual projects. So I will either refer those people to their program officers, or we can address them at the end of the presentation. So why don't we continue on to the next section?
Okay. Next up is my colleague, Haley McAlpine.
Great. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Haley McAlpine. I am a Senior Historic Preservation Specialist with the Historic Trust, and I will be the program officer for some of your projects this year, so we will be working very closely together. And today I'm going to talk to you about defining your scope of work. So next slide, please. Okay, so your scope of work is going to be specific to your grant project, and it is based off of the scope of work that you submitted with your original grant application. It's going to be outlined in what we call the attachment D1. So this is a component of your grant agreement, a very important component, as it contains most of the project-specific information in your grant agreement. So it's basically going to outline the activities that are going to be funded by your grant. So your individual program officers draft the D1 for your project. So we'll put this together for you and we will send it to you via email, probably in the next couple of months. So whoever's the project contact, keep an eye out for an email from your program officer with the D1 form. And once you get it, we'll have you take a look at it, review it, make sure everything looks good. And once you give us the thumbs up, we will use that to help generate your grant agreement. Okay, next slide, please. Great. So the attachment D1 scope of work form includes a handful of really important pieces of information, starting with your project budget and your grant award amount. So it sounds kind of self-explanatory, but the grant award amount is the dollar amount that you were awarded by the trust for your project. So that'll be listed right up at the top. And then the first section right below that will give a brief history and a statement of significance for the resource. And the following section will identify the project review authority. So for all of these planning and heritage tourism grants, the Historic Trust will be the project review authority. However, if your project has a lot of archaeology, there's a good chance that we will be consulting with our sister agency, the New Jersey Historic Preservation Office. They have two very well qualified archaeologists on staff who we will be kind of relying on to help us review some of those components of your project. But the project review authority isn't something that you will have to worry about at all. That's something that your program officer will work with the Historic Preservation Office directly on your behalf. So not anything for you to worry about. And then finally, the first page of your D1 is going to identify the activities funded by this grant. So if you applied for a National Register nomination and that's what you were approved to do, it will say something very simple like this grant will fund the creation of a National Register nomination for the resource. Pretty straightforward. So next slide. Okay, so the D1 form is also going to identify your project team. All consultants that work on trust-funded projects must meet professional qualification standards, and they have to be approved by the trust before you begin work. So for those of you who already had a consultant on board when you submitted your grant application, you had submitted a proposal and resumes and everything, then for those folks, your consultant has already been approved as part of our application review process. So you won't have to go through a secondary review with us. You're already greenlit to work with that consultant. If you had not selected a consultant yet at the time of application, it's no problem at all. That just means you're going to be working closely with your program officer to make sure that whoever you do decide to work with meets our professional qualification standards. And that includes all professionals on your project team. So maybe you're working with a graphic designer or another sub-consultant who's going to be working on a component of the project. We're going to want to see resumes and know that they've demonstrated a proficient work history with a project of a similar scope and scale. So your whole project team needs to be very well qualified to do the work. So again, you'll be working with your program officer on that if you had not already submitted a project team. And then just an important note, as Erin mentioned, we're going to get into reimbursements in the following section, but we will need a copy of a signed or executed contract or proposal with your consultant on file before we can issue you any reimbursement. So when you do sign that contract or you accept the proposal, just forward a scanned copy over to your program officer, and you'll actually see we include the proposal with the D1. So a scan of that is going to be a part of your grant agreement, part of your contract with the trust. Okay, next slide. Okay, so as I just mentioned, we do include the proposal. Sometimes it's not the executed copy. Maybe we don't have an executed copy when we do the grant agreement. If you had submitted a proposal with your grant application, more often than not, that's what we'll use. But if your consultant submitted a revised proposal between now and then, just let your program officer know and send them the updated contract. Because we actually use that to generate information on the D1. So you can see on this sample here, we have the 2 work products for this sample project broken out into line items. So if you're doing a National Register nomination and an archaeological management plan, you're going to see those 2 work products listed here with their associated cost. We also include your initial and final reimbursement amounts. So HSM and Heritage Tourism grants are reimbursed in 2 payments. The first is 80% of your award, and the second is the 20% remaining, which you'll get when you close out the project. So this is going to be really helpful for you to see exactly how much money you're going to be working with while the project is open and ongoing, and how much is going to be held back until we sign off on the final work product. So really good for financial planning for your year. And finally, the D1 includes your project schedule. So as Dorothy mentioned at the top of the presentation, your appropriations bill has successfully made it through the legislator, yay, and now we are just waiting on a signature. The day that the governor signs our bill is the day our project clock starts ticking. So we use that date to determine your agreement commencement date. That's the date of signature. Usually your work period commencement date will be that same date unless you've already begun work, and then we're going to use the day that you actually started work. Then you're going to have 18 months from that agreement commencement date to execute your grant agreement. So that means you've successfully completed all of those forms in your info packet and gotten them back to us, that we've generated the grant agreement, that it's been signed and countersigned and fully executed. Please don't wait 18 months. That's a long time, and we know your projects are all pressing, but it is there in case something goes catastrophically wrong. As we've learned in the last year, anything goes. So keep that in mind. Then we will have 2 years from the agreement commencement date for you to complete your work. And after that, you'll have a 3rd year, so 3 years after the agreement commencement date before your grant agreement expires. So that means that your work product has been submitted to the trust for review. Your PO's had a chance to review it and sign off on it as final, that you've gotten all of your closeout paperwork in, invoices, canceled checks, all that good stuff, so that we can close out your project before that 3-year mark. So again, all of these dates will be in your D1 in your grant agreement for your reference at any time. But it's just important to know that these are not like open-ended ongoing grants. We do have a schedule to keep, and the trust board has become more reticent to allow extensions. So really, extensions are for extremely extenuating circumstances. We really ask that you please stick to this schedule, because we know your work products are important and that your resource is important. So this timeline is here to help you. Okay, next slide. Okay, so there's a few project requirements for our HSM and Heritage Tourism grants. First up, and very important, is all work funded by the trust must meet the Federal Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. So this was a huge part of your application review, but these are also the federal guidelines that we as staff use to evaluate all of your work. So important to keep in mind. Also, we ask that all planning documents at least consider archaeology. So maybe archaeology isn't the star of what you're doing today, but your preservation plan or your HSR or your construction docs or whatever should at least acknowledge the potential for archaeology on the site. It's really important that archaeology isn't thought of as an afterthought, because when you go to do capital work, you're going to be required to do some sort of archaeology for any ground disturbance. So it will behoove you to include that now. And it is something that we do look for when we review your work products. And then finally, all preservation plans and historic structures reports funded by the trust from 2018 and on must comply with this preparation guide document that you can see in the background of the slide here. It's a really important, really user-friendly document, and that's exactly what we use when we get a preservation plan or an HSR in. We sit down with the checklist and your work product and go through page by page to make sure you have everything there. So that's in terms of both format and content. So if you are funded for a preservation plan or an HSR this year, please take some time to sit down with your consultant and make sure that it's clear that this is what the trust is using as our benchmark. So, I've reviewed work products that I've had to kick back because they're missing important pieces that are clearly spelled out in this checklist and this guidance document. So it'll make your review process faster. It'll make your work product better. So just make sure you've got this in the front of your mind. It is available on our resources tab on our website. So the full PDF of the guidance document, as well as a PDF of just the checklist, which is really handy and easy to use. So please don't leave that until the end. Okay, next slide. Okay, so finally, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the New Jersey state requirements. And before I get into it, all of this is spelled out in tab 3 of your grant manual. So the state requirements can be pretty complex and nuanced. So we encourage all of the CFOs or treasurers on your project, please dig into tab 3, familiarize yourself with what is required of you so that it does not come as a surprise. So first up is financial management and audits. If you receive over $100,000 in any fiscal year from a combination of state or federal grants, you're required to do an audit. So even though the Historic Trust grants for planning an HSS or for heritage tourism won't exceed $50,000, maybe you got other state grants for other projects or federal grants for other projects that combined will exceed $100,000, you will be required to submit an audit. So keep that in mind when you're kind of looking at the zoomed out big picture of your fiscal year, that there is an audit requirement there for that threshold. Also, please note that the trust does not reimburse audit costs. So that is something you're going to have to pay for out of your own budget. Cannot be submitted for reimbursement with the rest of your information. And then affirmative action. So all trust grantees are required to comply with New Jersey state affirmative action laws. It's really important that you include this non-discrimination language and policy in any proposals or contracts for your project. And it's on the consultant to provide evidence of compliance for that. We're not the agency that monitors the compliance. You'll have to work directly with the contract compliance unit of the Department of Treasury, and their contact info is listed in tab 3 of your grant manual. So if you've got questions about how to demonstrate compliance or who to talk to about that, please reach out to them directly. They're a great resource for you. And then prevailing wage won't actually apply to HSM or heritage tourism grants. So one less thing for you guys to worry about. So that's it for my section. Were there any questions in the chat that I can address now before we move on?
There are a couple. Some of them are holdovers from the last section. So Carrie might want to jump in as well. The first question from Heather is about insurance again. Could you please confirm what project dates we should include on the COI? Since the start date is not confirmed yet, but the COI is needed before it commences, it would be helpful to obtain clarification on what dates you'd like us to specify on the COI.
So you have to have insurance for the duration of the project, and I believe the dates for this for planning is what, Glenn? It starts whenever the governor signs it and then ends.
Right. So if since we don't have that date yet, we are anticipating it within this month. So if you include a date within January, if you want to get things going now, and again, at the maximum, it's going to be a 3-year grant. So it would go out 3 years. You might finish sooner than that, but if you're trying to, set on dates now, basically January of this year and 3 years out would cover it.
Great. Thank you.
A little bit louder, Sam. You're still a little bit tough.
Sure.
Thanks.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Scott asks, since the project contact has to be a separate person, would you still send the information to CFO as well? I'm not sure what Scott means by information, but I don't know.
So the signatory on the grant agreement cannot be your CFO. That's what I was saying. So they have to be two different people. I think it's wise to send whatever you have to the CFO. You certainly would want to send at least copies of the grant agreement to the CFO in order for them to be the financial oversight for the grant. But that's up to you. It's just that the person who signs the grant agreement should be someone who's intimately involved with the project. And your CFO isn't always that same person. And that CFO cannot be the same person who signs the grant agreement. That's the one that signs the payment vouchers and all of the financial requests going forward.
And just to add to that, Carrie, I mean, we basically have one contact person that we send all documents to. So it's up to that person, if it's not the CFO, to forward stuff on to the CFO or whoever else might be involved.
Right.
We have one contact person that we constantly communicate with.
Yeah. Thanks, Glenn.
Right, thank you. The next two questions are about audits, and they might be fairly project specific, but I'm not sure. So hopefully Glenn or Haley can answer these. Jane asks, does the $100,000 audit threshold include money received from PPP this year?
Ew.
Oh, that's a good question. I think the payroll protection program was technically a loan. It's a forgivable loan. I don't know if that would trigger the audit threshold because it's not an outright grant. I think we'd have to look closer at the guidelines, and that's a really excellent question because that's going to be totally new territory for us this year. So I don't know if I have a super clear answer. Glenn or Carrie, do you have any?
Just that typically I think that's a fine answer. It's a kind of uncharted territory, including the PPP. It is, what we do know is that when you are required to submit an audit, it definitely does have to be done by a professional from a peer-reviewed agency. It can't be pro bono. For example, it can't be your cousin who does you a favor. It has to be by an outside source that has been peer reviewed in the last 4 years. So that answers that one question. But the state does require that any money that you get from the state, and I'm not sure if this will include PPP, but goes toward that total that you would factor in for whether or not you need an audit. So it's not just the grant amount that you get from us, it's an accumulative amount that you get in any fiscal year from the state. But that's an excellent question. We're going to have to look into that.
Okay, so if there's no other questions for this section, I'm going to kick it over to my colleague Glenn Saponis. And I also just wanted to quickly note that if you do think of questions as we go on, we will have that Q&A at the end. So if something else pops up, feel free to drop it in the chat and we can address it at the end. Okay.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Glenn Saponis, as Haley mentioned. I'm going to be talking about administering an active grant. This basically is chapter 4 in your grant manual. Now, everything I'm about to go over is covered in detail in the grant manual or in the reference section on our web page, which is njht.org, including samples of completed forms. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is communication with the trust. The staff person assigned to your grant was copied actually on the email that included your info form and your project manual. Also, we have contact information for each staff member listed in the front part of your grant manual, as well as staff contact information available on our website. So plenty of places to get our contact information. Next slide, please. So we encourage you to contact us with any questions whatsoever. I mean, we'd much rather spend a minute here or there answering your questions now than trying to undo stuff that maybe gets done in the future. So feel free to always reach out to any of your staff members regarding your grant. Any question, nothing too small. So typically, we'll be in contact with you when you send us, as was mentioned earlier, contracts with your consultant preparing to do your grant funded work. We do need those signed copies. You'll send to us drafts of planning documents funded by the grant, whether it's a preservation plan, HSR, construction docs, whatever they might be. And you'll also be sending us quarterly reports as well as reimbursement requests. And after all that's done, you'll be sending out closeout documents as well, which include the final documents that are paid for by your grant, as well as your final report and reimbursement request. Also, as Haley mentioned, if you have not selected a consultant yet, you will need to provide us with sufficient documentation on that consultant for us to determine if they meet the federal standards, fellow qualification standards. If you did provide that consultant in your application, then you don't need to resubmit it at this time. Please also invite us to project meetings. While we may not be able to get to all of them, we do try to get out when we can. Again, in these circumstances, we would still social distance but still try to make it if we can. Also, if there are certain meetings that are going over very important information, or if we need to be there at the site to see something, we want to be able to put that into our schedules as well. Also, keep in mind that we should be receiving any copies of meeting minutes that you hold with your consultants. You should be emailing those to us too, so we could, again, keep track of what's going on and know where the project stands. Also, let us know if if anything is changing, whether it's your proposed scope of work, your consultants, contractors, whatever it might be. We need to approve any of those, so please let us know if that's in the works in some way. Next slide, please. The other time you'll be contacting the trust is submitting your quarterly reports. The report forms will be included in your grant agreement, but digital versions of the quarterly reports and reimbursement forms are also located through the resource tab on our website. The quarterly reports are required 4 times a year. The dates are listed there on the slide. You could do it by email with planning grants, but if there's a reimbursement request, we do need a copy by mail as well because of required original signatures. The quarterly reports in general talk about the current status, the project team, updates on work that is planned or underway, as well as the projected schedule and certification. Certification is basically you certifying, or the project contact certifying that everything is accurate and complete on the quarterly report. In addition to supporting a reimbursement request, these reports help us, again, determine if the grant project is on track and to understand the current status of the project. So even if there's no activity or very little activity at a time, please at least send us a quick email during the reporting times, just so we know that you guys are still alive and things are going on, and even if the project's at a standstill. Next slide, please. So again, the quarterly report, that's the attachment C1 of your grant agreement. It's the progress report and a reimbursement request. Depending on your particular project, the narrative section of this report may be a simple paragraph or two. Again, the certification is you signing off that the report is accurate. You're providing us with the team list, the project schedule, and any submissions that might be coming. These items in the report are especially important for the first report. You could then basically provide updates as you do subsequent reports following up. Since it's a digital copy that hopefully you've saved a copy of, you can just add to it as you submit for subsequent reports. Again, reports other than reimbursement requests consist of the first 2 pages of the form. If there is a little report, like I said, a quick email. Again, chapter 4 of the grant manual shows in detail how to complete this quarter report with an example of that. So chapter 4 of your manual. Next slide, please. So if you are doing your reimbursement request, again, for our planning grant or heritage tourism grant, there are 2 reimbursement for these grants. An initial request, which is 80% of your grant amount, and then the final request, which is the final 20% of your grant amount. As I mentioned, the initial reimbursement request is the C1 form in your grant agreement. You could submit your initial reimbursement request when your grant agreement has been fully executed both by you and the trust, You have a signed contract with your consultant, and we have a copy of that. We need that in our file. And once you have made a payment to your consultant, then you're able to submit your initial reimbursement request. That payment to your consultant could be an initial down payment, $100, $1,000. Some consultants have certain amounts that they require, but as soon as that first payment is made, you have a canceled check in hand, then you're able to submit, along with those other requirements are met, your first initial reimbursement request. Now, the final 20% of the grant will be reimbursed when you close out the grant. And we have approved and accepted all the documents funded by the grant, and the consultants have been fully paid. As Carrie had mentioned, payments take usually between 2 and 3 weeks once we have everything in hand. But again, if you have signed up for the automated clearinghouse payments, the ACH, the whole check mailing part gets much faster. And trust me, I've waited a month for a certain mail to come through over the last month, so things are being delayed. So if you're able to sign up for that through NJ Start, we do recommend that. It will simplify things. Next slide, please. So continuing with reimbursement request, additionally, we will need a state payment and transmittal voucher, and this has to be signed by your CFO or treasurer, whoever was notified, you notified on the attachment G that you signed as part of your info packet coming back to us. This transmittal and payment voucher will be available through your grant agreement. It's also available on our website. Please, no substitutions. It has to be that form that we use because it goes up to DCA fiscal. And again, that's your CFO treasurer will be signing that, and that's who has signed off on your attachment G. In addition to these forms, you'll include invoices and copies of canceled checks, or some sort of proof of payment that each invoice listed on your project ledger has been paid. The payment should correspond with the invoice, and they should be grouped together. It'll make us, trust staff, easier and quicker to go through your reimbursement request if the checks, canceled checks, and the payment invoices are grouped together. For agencies of government, when payment vouchers are provided as proof of payment, they must be completed, fully signed by all parties. That's both the person being paid as well as the government agency. Hopefully check numbers and amounts should be noted on the payment voucher as well. But that's an acceptable form of proof of payment. Also, I know banks right now, sometimes it's difficult to get a canceled check. You need some sort of proof from your bank, though, that the check has been cashed. So whether it's an actual physical screenshot of that, or like I said, perhaps a monthly balance or something like that, not balance, but monthly statement, but something that shows the check has been cashed is required. Next slide, please. So work product review. You'll be submitting your work products to the trust for review, drafts of those, whether it's a preservation plan, a HSR, perhaps construction drawings or specifications. We will be reviewing those. Please, allow, 4 weeks or so for us to get through it. Depends on time of year. We try to get through it as quick as possible, but please, make sure when you're scheduling your timing that you allow 4 weeks for us to look through it. Again, hopefully we can get through it faster. Final work products will then be submitted after incorporating our comments into that. We should receive 2 hard copies as well as 1 digital copy of each final work product. We share one of those copies with the State Historic Preservation Office. That's why we ask for 2. All work products must meet the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. And as Haley mentioned earlier, we strongly encourage that all preservation planning documents take into consideration archaeology at the site. While right now, we might not be doing ground disturbing activities, but in the future, if you are, we're going to require you to do archaeology. So if you start thinking about it now, hopefully that won't delay any construction projects you might have, prepared for the future. All preservation plans and HSRs must also comply with the guidelines presented in the preparation guide that Haley mentioned. Again, this document is also available on our website. The checklist is there. That's what we're looking at. So we do encourage you and your consultant to go through that. It'll help you better understand what's included in the preservation plan, but also to make sure that what is presented to us meets the and complies with those guidelines and those standards. Next slide, please. Next, I want to talk a little bit about amending the grant agreement. There are certain times when a grant agreement needs to be amended. If a project is not on track, the grant agreement can be amended to allow for an opportunity to complete the project. But if there's any change to the schedule for any reason, or change to the scope, or change to the consultant or contractor, please reach out to your staff person right away to discuss with them if an actual amendment to your agreement is needed. If it is, this request is the attachment D2 of your grant agreement. And it simply provides a place for you to explain the reasons why you need a change and what the delay was, if that is the actual reason for it. The request will be reviewed by the Grants and Loans Committee at its quarterly meeting, and you will then be informed of whether the changes have been approved or not. We understand that there are times when delays are caused by circumstances beyond your control, but really to the fullest extent possible, we really highly stress that you should make every effort to make sure your project stays on schedule. Getting an extension for your grant agreement is not a guarantee. The Trust Grants and Loans Committee will not automatically just grant the extension. It will have to be fully justified. The other thing to remember too is that your grant management history is part of future grant application evaluations. So anything you can do to be in good standing with that by keeping your project as much as possible without requiring extensions is to your benefit as well. Next slide, please. So lastly, I just want to go over closing out your grant. Hopefully by this point in time, your work is done. Everything has gone swimmingly well. Everything has met the Secretary of Interior standards. You've been in contact with your grant staff person. We've reviewed everything and everything has been approved, and we're all set now to close out the grant. So the final report in your grant agreement will be the C2 form. Again, this also will be available on our website if you need a digital copy to use. In this, you'll be providing a final narrative summarizing your project. You'll be updating all information provided in your initial and subsequent reports. You'll provide all finalized financial documentation, including all invoices and proof of payment not included in your initial reimbursement request. And you will provide another transmittal and payment voucher, again, signed with original signature in blue or red ink from your CFO or treasurer. Once all the elements of your final reimbursement report have been accepted and approved, you will receive the remaining 20% of your grant award. Remember, again, you'll have to basically spend 100% of your grant before you get the final 20%. So again, from a cash flow standpoint, that's important for you to know. But once we accept everything and all your paperwork is in, you'll get your final 20% check. That completes my section. Thank you very much. Erin, Sam, are there any questions? Actually, I should look. Wait. I talked about reimbursements. How can be no questions? All right.
No questions at this time, but you can always pipe in later in the presentation and we can address it at the end.
Yeah. And again, everything is in chapter 4 again of what I went over. So.
Okay, so hello everyone, my name is Ashley Parker and I am the program assistant at the Trust, and I also am the social media coordinator, and I'm going to talk with you today about publicity for your project and its important role. So this section outlines ideas that can be used throughout your project. So publicizing your project will help maintain visibility of your project and your organization during restoration. It can help increase attendance and membership at your site, as well as help your fundraising campaigns. Next slide, Erin. Most importantly, publicity for your project helps promote and raise awareness of history and historic preservation in New Jersey, while also ensuring ongoing fundraising funding for the New Jersey Historic Trust. So good publicity opportunities are grant award announcements and check presentations. As Dorothy had mentioned earlier, the trust does have a large check for photo opportunities, and we are very eager to use it. Project milestones such as groundbreaking ceremonies, ribbon cutting, and partial project completions, or coordinated with a special restoration process. We also encourage tours and special events being offered at your site, as well as profiles of your volunteers or special craftsmen who work at your site. We also ask that you add the New Jersey Historic Trust logo to your website, as well as link to our website in order to raise awareness about the Historic Trust. Next slide, Erin. And in addition, your site might also be eligible for listing on Journey Through Jersey, the state's go-to website for all things heritage tourism, which was launched by the Trust in 2017. The website features heritage destinations throughout New Jersey, as well as annual events, blog posts, and educational resources, which we then feature on Journey Through Jersey's social media channels. All applicants and grantees are highly encouraged to nominate their site and add a link to the Journey Through Jersey website on their own web pages if you are already listed on Journey Through Jersey. Next slide, Erin. And stay in touch with us. The Trust is active on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We are always looking for new content to promote, and we enjoy seeing your progress, photos, news coverage, and or other content you would like us to share. You can either email us directly or please tag us in your posts. We try to share as much as possible, and let us help you. We also ask that you share our posts to help us raise awareness of historic preservation in New Jersey and continued funding opportunities. And are there any questions, Sam?
There are no questions at this time. If anyone has additional questions, we do have more time, so please feel free to pipe in with your question. We did have another question about the grant agreement, which was answered via text, but it may be worth repeating for other participants. The question was about the CFO on attachment G of the grant agreement. The CFO on attachment G cannot also be the authorized signatory on attachment E. That is correct. They cannot be the same person. So at this point, I'm not seeing any other questions.
Erin, do you want to just go quickly, just again, when this will be available for people to access again?
Sure thing. So we are working on making this recording available on YouTube. I'm going to do some configuring tomorrow to make that happen, hopefully. So my game plan is to make sure that this link is available both on our website and will go out via email sometime next week. I'm hoping Monday, but don't quote me on that. We're also making a PDF version of this PowerPoint available so you can click through at your convenience. And of course, your program officer is always available to help with questions.
One thing I just want to add, because of COVID, we are all working pretty much remotely. So frankly, email is probably the quickest way to get hold of all of us. We do check our voicemail, but email is we're constantly in contact with that. So I do recommend reaching out to us via email as your preferred choice, but any way you want to get hold of us, we're there for you. So.
I'm taking it as a good sign that we don't have any more questions.
Yeah, I'm seeing something pop up here.
We're getting some thank yous. Rusty Rivera has, I think, a follow-up question about reimbursement for different phases. Rusty, I'm going to encourage you to reach out to your assigned program officer with some of the more project-specific questions. And that is it for the questions at this moment.
Dorothy, anything you want to add?
I'm unmuting myself. No, I just want to thank everybody for bearing with us in this virtual webinar setting, and I appreciate all of your time. We're looking forward to working with you. And as Erin said, we should be making this presentation available to you in the future. Don't hesitate to reach out to us if you do have any questions. And I guess that's it. Thanks everybody for coming, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.